This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Episode 294, for March the 4th, 2018. Welcome! This March marks the 4th year of Artemis Rising, the annual showcase of women and non-binary authors across the Escape Artist podcasts.
We are Breaking the Glass Slipper, a podcast about women in speculative fiction. Women have been writing fabulous speculative fiction for years, but are constantly overlooked. Meanwhile, female characters have been marginalised, and when they do appear, they are often stereotyped, and they're only there in service to the male protagonist. As female lovers of speculative fiction, we want to give female characters and creators a platform to show how fantastic they are. So I am Megan Lee, and I'm sort of the instigator of Breaking the Glass Slipper.
I'm Charlotte Bond. I'm a writer of horror and dark fantasy, and a ghostwriter of many different genres. I'm a freelance editor, a reviewer for Ginger Nuts of Horror, and for the British Fantasy Society.
And I'm Lucy Hounsome, the author of the epic fantasy series The Worldmaker Trilogy, published by Tor UK. The first story selected by the Cast of Wonders team for Artemis Rising in 2018 is Earn Your Breath by Jamie O'Meara, a Cast of Wonders original. Jamie O'Meara shares her Seattle home with 2 needy cats, too many fish tanks, and a patient husband. This is her second appearance in Cast of Wonders. When she isn't reading or writing, she enjoys many hobbies, including knitting, PC gaming, and photography. Powered by tea and buried in yarn, she blogs infrequently at jamieomeara.com and can be found on social media as @JamieO'Meara.
Today's story is narrated by Iba Armanicus. Raised by sword fighters and Eastern European freedom fighters, Iba Armanicus is a writer-director currently based in Los Angeles. Her darkly comedic genre sensibilities are showcased in 2 web series and a feature film forthcoming later this year. One day she will find time to make a website, but in the meantime you can follow her projects and adventures on Twitter or Instagram. And now we've a tale to tell.
Earn Your Breath by Jamie O'Meara. Leith had fought the Snake Island Raiders for every summer since her 15th year, and had yet to taste defeat. She had dueled the boatmen of the north with their fish-belly white skin, and won the pair of metal knives envied by many a man in her village. Yet it was the sight of the latch on the cook shack door that filled her with dread. Greystone's village elders said fate could not be changed, and she would rather die than prove them right. But each passing day brought her 20th year closer, and her throat remained bare of a breath mark. No, she still had time. A few days, but while time remained, so too did hope. Leith shook her head, as much in defiance as to clear away her uncertainty. Squaring her shoulders, she marched to the cook shack door, a small parcel of food clutched in one hand. The shack was a hastily made addition tacked on to the village's cookhouse proper. The rough-cut planks joined at odd angles, providing meager protection from the elements. A slab of oak served as an ill-fitting door, its simple hook and latch installed at eye height, more to keep nosy children out than to keep the poor creature inside in. A plain lock that afforded peace, both to Greystone and the disgraced villager within, and it served as a reminder of the inescapable fate that befell any who disappointed Mother Breathless. A possible fate, but it wouldn't be Leith's. She lifted the latch and crept inside, pausing beside the door to allow her eyes to adjust to the dim light. A shriveled woman huddled in the far corner of the shack, a threadbare blanket hanging from her bony shoulders. Yella, the only villager who'd failed to earn their breathmark from Greystone's deity. The thick blue circle from the top of the throat to the collarbone, with a wavy line through the center, signaled Mother Breathless's decision that one had earned their place in the village, going from dependent child to providing adult. But instead of a breathmark, the beige skin on Yella's throat had sloughed off in large flakes, replaced by wrinkled gray flesh. Shunned by the village, she'd withdrawn from all contact. The once vibrant woman Leith remembered from her youth had slowly been reduced to the husk that sat before her as despair claimed Yella's spirit. Leith knelt behind Yella and offered the meat pie she'd brought, but the woman gave no sign of noticing. Tearing off a small piece, Leith placed it inside Yella's mouth as gently as she could. Yella chewed reflexively, but after a few pieces she choked and refused to eat more. Frustrated, Leith sat back on her heels. It wouldn't be that long now before the pitiful woman stopped eating entirely. Bile rose in her throat, followed by a rush of anger. How could Yella have given up so easily? Why didn't she fight? Will I? Leith's insides squirmed at the treacherous inner thought. Easy for her to be angry, but would she be any different when the time came? Her 20th year, the same age when Yella failed to earn her breath. The door creaked open and Ton, her childhood friend, slipped in. I thought I saw you go in here. Leith put the remaining food in Yella's palm before joining him near the door. Ton opened his mouth to speak, closed it, glanced at Yella, then back at Leith. The look was familiar and full of unspoken words she never wanted to hear again. Leith, he began, we will not. Why won't you let me help you? Do you want to end up like her? Ton jerked a thumb at Yella. We don't have to be bound to one another. I'm not offering because I want... It's not like that. The look on his face wrenched her heart. She'd been horrified and incensed by Turn when he suggested their pairing several days earlier. And she'd been afraid, the direness of her situation looming. Yet, as she looked into his eyes and saw his frustration on her behalf, the anger vanished. I just haven't become what she expects yet, Leith said. No woman will earn her breath while childless. May I die gasping? Ton quickly tapped his throat, his breathmark visible despite the meager light, in apology to the deity. You should have earned it by now. You haven't, and you won't. The elders don't know how. They don't know what it takes for men. But everyone knew for the women. Leith stared at him, mouth open but silent. Greystone couldn't afford to turn down a capable defender, but the warriors never welcomed her. Practicality forced admittance, but tradition withheld acceptance. Her breathmark would signal change. She knew it. Ton sighed. You're never going to earn your breathmark by being you. Mother Breathless wants more children to breathe through. I can give you that. He voiced all her fears, and they hurt more as his words than as thoughts running loose in her head. She didn't hate children. Mother Breathless knew she loved her nephew. But she'd never wanted her own, and the impression that she was unworthy while childless rankled. She had fears, but she had pride too, and it wouldn't let her accept Ton's plan. She didn't want a child, or Ton, or anyone. She wanted her breath. You're family to me. She reached out to squeeze his hand. I know what it means for you to offer, but I can't earn my breath like that. I don't believe she's so hateful. Aren't you pathetic? A voice sounded on the other side of the door. Leith pulled it open to find Bened, the village headman's son, on the other side. He sneered at them. Thought I'd find you two coupling like dogs. Or are you here for inspiration? Leith's hand balled into a fist. Bened was a spindly youth, all of 14 years, but still he was the headman's son. Say that again. Ton cut her off. Your father send you to me for remedial lessons? I saw you practicing earlier. He pointed to the sling hanging from Bened's belt. Bened flushed, but he didn't dare disparage Ton's peerless aim. Instead, he glared at Leith. There won't be handouts for worthless culls when I'm headman. He spat at their feet, then ran off, disappearing around the cookhouse's corner. Auntie Leith! A boy called. A genuine smile brightened Leith's face as her nephew, Dana, galloped up. 11 years old and full of an energy she swore had passed her over in childhood. His head was crowned with a braided grass garland, decorations for the upcoming feast, no doubt. Though over 60 people called Greystone home, for the last 3 days several dozen warriors and boys in their 15th year had been away on the annual manhood hunt, searching for boar. With the celebratory feast scheduled for that night, The remaining villagers busied themselves with preparations and paid no attention to a curly-haired boy running amok with a liberated decoration. Dana barreled into Ton, and the two exchanged playful punches as Leith ushered them both outside and closed the shack door. Dana eyed the latch. "When will you earn your breath, Auntie?" "When Mother Breathless finds me worthy, same as everyone else." Leith tapped him on the nose. "Same as she will for you one day." "Mama said you have to have babies first." "That might be hard for you then." "Not for me, you." He waved his arms. "Dana, stop bothering your aunt." Lise walked up, a basket filled with smoked fish in one hand. With her long waves of chestnut-colored hair and golden skin, Lise made Leith feel weather-burned and coarse in her presence. "Elder Stone is telling stories at the circle. I'd like you to go listen." "Fine," Dana sighed. "Auntie, can we practice knife-throwing later?" Leith started to say yes, but Lisa's firm headshake cut her off. "We have the feast tonight." Dana opened his mouth to argue, but he saw the severity of his mother's eyes. He knew better than to engage. A grim smile formed on Leith's mouth. She should be so wise. "We'll get some throws in at dawn," she winked. Dana whooped in excitement and skipped away before his mother could counter. As her sister turned to face her, Leith instinctively tensed for a fight before catching herself. Muscles and reflexes never protected against a lecture from her older sibling. "I'll make sure he gets there," Ton said, before beating a hasty retreat. "Why are you doing this?" Lise could inject frost into words in a manner Lith longed to master. "Spending time with my nephew?" Lise glowered. "Don't play coy with me, little sister. Dana idolizes you. The least you could do is set a good example." She walked into the cookhouse. Leith followed her to a table. "Teaching him practical skills is a bad example. Leave that to men." Leith pulled a fish from the basket and began cutting it into portions. "Today he said he wants to grow up big and strong like his auntie. That's a bad thing?" "Yes!" Leith slammed the knife onto the table. "My son wishes to grow up and be like a woman." "He doesn't mean, why can't you act like you're supposed to? Stop playing the warrior. Then you'll earn your breath." "Act like a woman, eh? Shall I spread my legs for your man, then? What does the sire matter so long as I produce?" "Don't be crude," Lise said. "You know what she expects. Couple with Ton and be done with it. You're not likely to get anyone else." "And you call me crude?" Lise glanced at the wall of the cookhouse, shared with Yella's shack. "I wonder how long the mother will stand for your selfishness." "I want my breath, but I want to truly earn it." Lise shrugged. "Not badly enough, it seems." A scream built, then died in Leith's throat. Anger solved nothing with her narrow-minded sister. "You're wrong." Leith stalked away, followed by her sister's disdainful laugh. Leith's arms trembled with pent-up anger, vicious remarks swirling unspoken in her head. How did Lise always win their verbal battles? She had a way of winding up the rage in Leith to the point where all smart retorts jammed together in an attempt to spill out, rendering her fuming but speechless. She followed the outer wall, using the storage shed at the back for cover, stopping when she reached the smaller gate and lone watchtower at the village's rear. The back of Greystone's valley opened out into a wide river, the gently rippling surface belying the swift currents beneath. With assaults from this end rare, the sole tower had fallen into disrepair, a lowly station to serve watch. Leith's eyebrows rose in surprise when she recognized the figure sitting in the tower. Facing the village, rather than the water, was Bened. Even privileged sons had to do chores. "Already on watch?" Bened's eyes flicked down to her before he sniffed and pointedly resumed looking elsewhere. "No task is too small for a headman." Leith swallowed her snort. "Your father must be proud." Bened would only be on watch in this dull post because Headman Karen did believe that a leader should set an example for his people. She suspected that when Bened became headman, the tower would go unmanned. "He is proud of all who do their part for the village. May Mother Breathless honor those who share her values." Bened didn't bother to cover his scorn. "I look forward to bathing in her honor, then." Leith snapped back. She turned and headed for the shoreline. Shouting in the distance ground her to a halt before she'd reached the water's edge. The shouts mingled with screams. A child's shriek, high-pitched and terrified, sent her racing back. These were not the excited cries she'd expected to herald the return of the hunt. "What is it?" she called up to Benid. A breeze picked up, carrying to them the scent of smoke. "Raiders, with fire." Benid rushed to the tower's ladder and jumped down 2 rungs at a time. "There must be 20 of them at the front gate." Lee's skin had prickled all over at the mention of their murderous island neighbors bearing flames, but she caught Benid by the arm before he could run past. "You're on watch." He tried to shrug out of her grip, eyes narrowing first in surprise, then in embarrassment-fueled anger when she held fast. "You have a duty to watch this post. They could be attacking on 2 fronts." Lilith kept her tone as calm and non-accusatory as she could muster. "Ugly sow," Benid hissed, freeing himself and swinging at her face. She stepped back, letting his fist glide past her nose. She raised her hands in a placating manner. "Benid, I am the headman's son. My village is under attack, and you want me to sit here?" He ran past her. "Watch it yourself." She stared after him. The screams and clamor of fighting jolted Leith into action. She shook her head, both at Benid's folly and her own lapse in focus, then went to the watchtower's ladder and clambered up. No task too small indeed. "Leith!" She looked down to see Ton running towards her, using the wall for cover. He bled from a small cut to his shoulder, but otherwise looked unarmed. "Help protect the gate!" Her eyes returned to scanning the water. The raiders from Snake Island had once tried paddling down the shoreline, and though she longed to join the main fight, she wouldn't be caught unaware. "They need you more than me." Ton stopped at the foot of the tower to catch his breath. Leith's eyes lingered on a dead tree floating down the river. She leaned forward, squinting to get a better view. Realization caused her hands to break out into a cold sweat. "I think we're both where we need to be." They changed places, and as the sharpest eyes in the village, Ton quickly confirmed her suspicions. "It's moving against the current," he said, alarm causing his voice to rise. "I see hands." Being right and making Benid look the fool quickly lost its glow. Common sense and some tactics meant nothing to a dead person. Leith walked forward, situating herself between the tower and the river's edge. The log inched closer. "Leith!" Ton called. She ignored him. Faces with slit nostrils, reminiscent of snakes, features gifted by their own deity, broke the surface, spitting aside the hollow reeds the raiders had used to breathe. Their eerie yellow eyes brightened at the sight of the 2 lonely defenders, and their leaders smiled hungrily. 6 men. She heard Ton blowing the distress signal on the watchtower's horn, and thought she heard an answering call. Or was it hopeful imagination? From the sounds of the battle raging behind her, only a fool would depend upon the warriors making a fortuitous return. She hadn't survived the first 5 years of raids by being foolish. "Leith, get up here!" She shook her head. "Pull up the ladder. Watch my back." "We can hold out up here." Worry strained Ton's voice. She couldn't have that. Leith glanced back and gave him a thin smile. "You're the best sling in the whole village. I've got the ground, you watch my back." She spoke calmly, words delivered in a manner that brooked no argument. Ton's eyes closed, then opened after a pause, not so much a blink as a gathering of wits. He picked up his sling and gave it an experimental twirl. Leith faced the water. The raiders swam close, their feet straining to reach the bottom. "I don't need to win," she thought, her hands settling on the prized knives sheathed at her waist. "Only endure." Her palms embraced their handles with the familiarity of old friends. One to skin, another to bone. Fair tools for a bloodletting day. The last traces of nervousness faded, replaced by a warm, gentle pressure that enveloped her, dimming the sounds of fighting. She was apart from it, the steady beating of her heart both a sensation and a sound in her ears. Leith stepped back into a fighting stance with poise born from hours of practice and passion. The raiders swaggered ashore, pulling their weapons from the snakeskin wrappings they called clothing. She could sense their overconfidence, all quick judgment and presumptions based on her looks. It had been months since the last attack. How quickly they forgot her. Then again, tales struggled home when there were no survivors. 5 fanned out into a tight semicircle, leaving the last digging within the branches of the log. Leith left him for Ton and his sling, focusing instead on the men approaching her. One raider on her left had a boatman's spear of polished wood, capped by a metal blade. She gave him a predatory smile of her own. Leg muscles tightening as her knees bent, she gathered herself. The energy released at a whisper of asking, and Leith shot forward to meet the raider. Her body knew the extent of its reach and how to deliver the desired force. She knew when she could ask for a burst of speed, or drop into a crouch and trust her knees to hold. There was no surprise or disappointment at how quickly she could explode up or lash out. Using the raider's complacency to her advantage, Leith slid around the metal spearhead, turning it aside with her slender, tapered boning knife with more strength than the spear's wielder expected. The short, wide blade of her skinning knife plunged into his chest, its hooked end tearing a flap of skin free on its way out. The boning knife arced back to kiss his throat. A passionate kiss, quick and vigorous and demanding. It left a spray of blood on the ground. His body followed shortly thereafter. The raiders were stunned by her skill and ferocity, but only for the space of a breath. A stone from Ton's sling downed the man to Leith's right, with a solid thunk akin to knocking sharply on a piece of wood, but meatier. A quick peek over the shoulder of the remaining 3 raiders revealed the 6th man face down in the river. The raiders raised their stone-blade knives, hisses in their own language pouring from their lipless mouths. Yellow eyes narrowed with rage, they charged her in unison. Her knives swirled through the air, fluid and relentless as they sought a mark. Leith circled around the raiders, twisting and sidestepping their jabbing blades. Even as a tip struck true, she shrugged off the little pains, only the ghost of a falter in her step. She moved with a dancer's powerful grace. Her fists wrought death in her wake. As she blocked one raider's knife and forced another to stumble away to escape her backhand, Leith allowed herself a tiny inward smile. They didn't expect her to match them in strength, were dismayed to their deaths by her speed. She felt cheated when one of Ton's stones came out of the sky, leaving only a pair of the original 6 to contend with her flashing knives. They retreated a few steps, slit nostrils flaring. One's tongue darted out, and Leith wondered if it was true that the Snake Islanders could taste the air, if they could smell her resolve. A quick glance passed between them. One raider leapt forward, shrieking as the other turned and ran for the log. Leith parried the attack, landing several cuts as she tried to edge past. He didn't pause, continuing to screech while attacking with both blade and fist. He fought with the desperate, unburdened fervor of a man who knows he will die. A splash of a rock hitting water broke through her battle fog. Ton had missed. A growl rumbled from deep in her throat, her lips curling back in a snarl for the suicidal raider. A faint burn seared deep within her muscles, signaling her body's needs and inevitable limitations. They came together with a dull thump of flesh smacking flesh, roaring and snapping at each other. The raider twisted and spun, trying to be unpredictable about where he would stab. A spark at the edge of her vision pulled her focus long enough for the raider to slip under her defenses. His knife carved a stinging line across her collarbone to the center of her breasts, regaining her full attention but with an added urgency. Fire. Her wound burned, yet even as fatigue taxed her speed, she could sense in that regard she wasn't alone. The stone knife faltered, moving with the waving taint of exhaustion. Leith struck hard with the sturdier hilt of her skinning knife, urging her muscles to lend their dwindling strength. The raider's arm shuddered as he blocked, and he had nothing left to stop her follow-through. A deft upward thrust of her boning knife through his lower ribs ended their personal battle. Something whooshed past her. Leith turned, eyes fixed on a glowing, melon-sized bundle in flight, headed towards the nearest storage shed located on the other side of the wall. Cold fear clenched at her stomach. The bundle might not make it that far, but dry grass mats and decorations for the feast seemed to adorn every open space in the village. If the bundle scattered its fiery contents far enough, its destination wouldn't matter, and she couldn't stop it. A stone lit into the bundle, splitting it open to spray burning debris onto the ground a safe 6 paces short. Exhaling shakily in relief, Leith turned to the last raider. His yellow eyes were wide as plates in surprise at Ton's uncanny aim. He looked at her, a flint and chip of steel still clenched in his hands. Before Leith could take a step, an arrow whistled past her to bury itself in the raider's chest. A gasp pushed past his lips, one hand raising to brush against the wood before he sank to the ground. Leith whirled around, eyes searching for the source. Bened stood at the gate, with several of the village warriors surrounding him. He lowered his bow, a triumphant smirk on his face. He glanced back at Ton, who jubilantly shook his fist. The warriors gathered around Bened, cheered, their cries echoing throughout the village. Headman Karen walked forward, raising his spear for silence. He stopped at the foot of the watchtower. Ton jumped down and Karen clapped him on the shoulder. "Glory be to the sharp eyes of Ton." Another cheer and applause met his words. Ton flushed and he murmured something as he gestured in Leith's direction. Karen slowly turned to Leith, who stood awkwardly in the middle between the village and the tower, bloody knives still in hand. His eyebrows raised slightly, giving his gaze the flat, arrogant impression often emulated by his son.
Praise also to Leith for recognizing her duty to aid the warriors.
A scattering of hesitant applause.
Glory be to my son, whose arrow saved us from ruin.
Karen walked back to the gate, voice returning to its thunderous tone. Greystone erupted with cheers, fists pumping the air as the villagers expressed their joy for a suitable subject. Leith pressed her tunic against the bleeding slash on her chest, fighting the urge to spit. Ton hurried to her side, shrugging helplessly in answer to her look. Bened raised one hand for silence. His mouth opened, a word starting to form when his back arched. His head tipped back to bare his throat. No. The breath mark bloomed across his exposed flesh. The circle traced around the knob on his throat, then a darker wavy line dashed through its center. Bened straightened, mouth open and panting as if he had come back from a sprint. His fingers caressed his throat. He leapt into the air and screamed, a scream of triumph and vindication and even a hint of relief. It was a sound Leith dreamt of making. A wave of numbness washed over her, and she threw herself into its deadening embrace. She shut her eyes as the villagers cheered, and Karen raised his son's arm in the air. "Where is mine? How do I still disappoint you?" There was no answer. Leith recoiled from the comforting hand Ton offered. Sheathing her knives, she started walking, not caring the direction so long as it was away. Her name crackled across the air. She didn't stop, but Bened soon overtook her. "Come and celebrate the earning of my breath." Her eyes leapt to the blue mark on his throat, and her lips curled back into a soundless snarl. In the span of a quick breath, realization struck. No, she was not like Yella. There was no despair in her heart, for she no longer desired a mark of her own. But she would fight for what Yella had once been, against the village and Mother Breathless and the mindset that a woman's breath meant only one thing. Never. Bened seized her by the arm. "You." Leith swept her left leg out, knocking him off balance. Her palm slammed into his chest. Bened fell unceremoniously to the ground. He stared up at her, mouth flapping like a surprised fish. The village went deathly silent. She palmed her boning knife and advanced a step, noting how Bened and the crowd alike cringed. Leith smiled, finally a bit of respect. She sneered, letting her hand dawdle as she sheathed the knife. "May you die gasping, breathless," Leith thought. Her breath caught in her throat, a splutter escaping her lips as the flesh of her neck went ice cold. Ton rushed to her side, his fingers unsure on her arm. A feeling like an invisible hand clenching around her throat caused Leith to choke. She reached up to claw at the presence, but as suddenly it had come, the pressure building in her head and the iciness vanished. She tipped her head back and greedily inhaled. Horrified gasp drew her eyes to the two men. Bened regained his feet. "Mother Breathless curses you." He fled to the village. Ton remained, but he stood tensely, mouth agape. Cursed by Mother Breathless? Leith laughed with darkened glee at the look of grief in her friend's eyes, knowing exactly what he would see. Mother Breathless had finally given her a mark. A black smear across her throat. That settled things. Leith squeezed Ton's hand in the only farewell she could bear. Then she turned to face the village, eyes questing after her nephew. He stood near the gate, Lisa's arms holding him tightly in place. Leith nodded at him before she walked away. She didn't have the words to explain this moment to a child, but perhaps one day. Ton hastened alongside her, but she wouldn't slow now, not even for him. Or her family, remember? A ghost of his impish smile returned. Leith smiled, her heart lifting. Then let's find a new one.
Jamie had this to say about her story. I've known from a very young age that I didn't want to have kids, and I've never been shy about sharing it. Unfortunately, that led to lots of comments from, I guess, well-meaning friends, family, and complete strangers. You'll change your mind when you're older. I heard that one a lot until my mid-20s. Now that I'm 30 and have been married for several years, I'm told that I'll change my mind once my biological clock starts ticking. And then there's the more nasty, you're not a real woman until you have kids. Earn Your Breath was born from anger. It's a play on the old writing advice, to write what you know. I know that a woman's worth is measured in more than just children.
So what I really liked about this story is that Lith is a woman who knows her own capabilities and limitations, whether that's from talking to her sister or when she's fighting with the snake men, but she also knows the limitations and capabilities of those around her, such as when she says she will fight on the front line and suggests that Torn stay up in the watchtower. And I thought that made her a very strong and very empathetic heroine. I really don't like heroines or heroes who go at it and don't know their own limitations and just make really stupid mistakes.
Yeah, I really appreciated that too, that she knows her own strength, and she knows the strength of her best friend as well. I think on the whole, what struck me is how well the story was executed. I thought it was very well written, beautifully portrayed. The fantasy elements felt very real, and delivered without too much info dumping, which can happen in short stories. Yeah, I mean, I think technically it's a really beautiful piece of writing, and that's before we even get on to the quite, serious themes that the author is discussing here.
I agree. I mean, I like the fact that there were lots of subtleties to it that you wouldn't expect in a short story. I like the way they had the analogy between the snake men and the villagers, both blessed by an unpleasant god, and both underestimating our heroine. I thought that was a really nice balance that you got within a story that wasn't really very long, that you might expect perhaps more in a novella length.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the technical execution was just really excellent, and I know that I am a reviewer who really gets down, into the nitty-gritty, and so I really appreciate that kind of thing. But also, I think it should be said that, when you read the story, you can really feel the author's anger. And I think that, from what Jamie said about how she wrote the story, where it came from, and you can really see that in her work. I think it's both a positive and potentially a negative, in the sense that it's wonderful to get that much feeling across in a short story and in any writing, really, that you can really feel that anger. But also, potentially it does kind of then drive home the message of it a little bit aggressively.
Yeah, I mean, I think picking out things like manhood, hunt, and words like that, which obviously, this story is about gender and gender identity and gender roles. So, picking out words like that, it does make it very clear that there is an agenda in this story, which, as Megan says, is not a bad thing. It's sometimes it can, cause us to kind of jump out of the story. So, I found myself, while I was reading it and while I appreciated the story, I was also at the same time thinking, well, I can see that the author has a message here, and, what is she trying to say? So, yeah, okay, I guess that's good and that's bad. I think on the whole, it was a very successful story. And I think it depends where you're kind of coming from, whether you appreciate it or not. I know that we all had quite different opinions about it.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own little girl, and I can see Jamie's rage, and I've even experienced it, because I well remember so when are you going to have kids question that you constantly get trotted out to married couples. And having had a child, I can tell you that the questions don't stop. They just transform into, so when are you going to have the next one? But I just found it a little uncomfortable that mothers are so hard done by in fiction in particular. I mean, the big reveal is never, I am your mother. And any young person destined for greatness, the first thing that happens is they always get rid of the parents. So I thought Earn Your Breath made really strong, valid points. And I can see why, given the word length and the need for drama, that the sister-mother figure were against her. But for me, I still prefer to see women banding together against a patriarchal society rather than vilifying each other within that society. And I really enjoyed the ending because it was very clear that it was the patriarchal society that was treating Lilith's valid accomplishments as worthless. And I like the twist that she earned a curse from this society, and yet it liberated her.
It was really nicely done. It was interesting because I saw a video the other day that actually examined the phrase childless and said that that's a really negative phrase to use and that we really should be talking about child-free. And that was interesting because I thought, well, you know, it does kind of come down in the middle. You know, I don't think that shouldn't really upset kind of either party here. And, you know, maybe we shouldn't. I think I completely agree with the author when, you know, she feels like, you know, there are expectations put upon us, her and all of us as women by society that we are expected to reproduce, and you do have to challenge these viewpoints. But I also think Charlotte's commentary is on point as well, because we don't often see mothers in heroic roles very often, and they're not natural. And it's the same thing with older women as well, that we tend to sideline women who are of a certain age and also mothers, as if, you know, the act of motherhood somehow strips them of their independence and their power, which I would obviously argue is completely false, because, you know, mothers are some of the strongest women I know, and I'm, you know, speaking from experience with my mother here.
So I also found it quite interesting and a little bit disappointing, maybe, that the god who, you know, holds all these people in the village to her standard is a woman. And again, so you know, as Charlotte was saying, you know, you have the women against each other. Even the god who is sort of harsh and judging him and setting up this, you know, standard of what makes a woman is actually a woman herself. And that was, you know, just it played into that little bit of the antagonism between the women as well.
But don't you agree it's also representative of society that actually women are the harshest critics and we are the harshest on our own gender?
Yes.
And we are also responsible for upholding the patriarchy. So perhaps that picks up on, you know, something that, you know, we're actually dealing with in reality.
I think going back to what I said earlier about the subtleties between the analogy between the snake men and the villagers, and you've got Mother Breathless and the unnamed snake god, I think you're right that you've got this really harsh mother figure, but then at the same time you've also got the really harsh snake god that transforms his own worshippers into something really, really inhuman. And I think that's, I mean, as a mother, I struggled with the mother as the goddess being the main villain in it. But at the same time, I also appreciated the message that it's not necessarily their station. It is the idea of everybody being against you, and you're as much a whim of the gods, whether that's Mother Breathless or the snake god who's going to turn you into a snake. And it's all about oppression of organized societies. That was how I read that particular inference within the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about oppression of individuality, because actually
exactly.
All she wants to do is be herself. And she says that, why isn't Mother Breathless rewarding me for basically being myself? And of course is told, well, life doesn't work like that, or gender roles don't work like that. And so it is an uplifting ending when she forges ahead to create her own society in her own world that aren't bound as strictly as ours.
Exactly, because if you don't have Mother Breathless, you have the snake god who's going to turn you into a snake. So your options are pretty limited unless you break out of the whole society on both sides of the river. I think what Earn Your Breath shows us is that whatever your position in society, whether it's single or parent, aunt or sibling, women are often in a no-win situation where it can even feel like the gods are against you. And the only freedom you can find is if you can discover your individuality, and use your strengths to break out of it.
Join us again next week for our second Artemis Rising story for 2018.
Cast of Wonders loves bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but they can't do it without your support. Your donations pay their authors, narrators, servers and staff. Please consider supporting them with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review them on iTunes, request on Spotify, and consider the stories they publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. Join the discussion on the EA forum, forum.escapeartists.net, or visit Twitter at Cast of Wonders. Come say hello.
Cast of Wonders is a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and is brought to you by editor and host Marguerite Kenner, assistant editor Catherine Inskip, associate editors Tonya Bezpalko, Amy Brennan, Alicia Caparasso, Trace Fontil, Alexis Goebel, William Haight Minor, Andrew K. Ho, Sean Proctor, Ray O, Susie Rodriguez, Carissa Sluss, Emma Smales, and Chris Tang. Audio producer Jeremy Carter, and community manager Danny Daly. Our Artemis Rising episodes this year are brought to you by the editorial team of Catherine Inskip, Danny Daly, and Alexis Goebel, and produced by Marguerite Kenner.
This episode was hosted by Breaking the Glass Slipper, a podcast celebrating women in speculative fiction. Cast of Wonders episodes are released under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download it or listen to the episode on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. The theme music, Appeal to Heavens, is by Alexei Nov and available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thanks for listening.